In this video, I'm going to show you how to make this baseball jersey cake. Hi, it's Karolyn. I'm here to help you learn how to bake and decorate amazing cakes, and in this video we are decorating this baseball jersey cake, which is it's like an intermediate design. It's not super difficult, but you do have to have a little bit of skill to be able to do this one. Like always, I am starting with my cake already baked, filled, iced, and it's in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. And I have videos showing you how I bake, fill, ice, refrigerate cakes, make the icing, make the fondant. All of that is going to be linked in the description. And I will also link down there all of the tools that I use and any other videos that I reference. So let's get started. All right, if you watch my videos, you know what I'm going to say. I only work with marshmallow fondant, and I always add this Gum-Tex powder, Tylose powder, CMC powder. It's the same thing. I add it into my fondant, sprinkle it on, knead it together, roll it out, and let it sit so it could dry a little stiffer. I have this button mold that I'm going to be using. I want to make sure these ribbons will fit a button on it so it's wide enough. I rolled out that white fondant really thin, and I'm cutting a bunch of these ribbon strips. And then I'm going to remove those little pieces in between and take my fingers and smooth out all those cuts. And then I have a cake box lid. I always cut lids off of boxes and keep them for things like this. I'm putting all those ribbons on that box lid, and then I'm taking my rulers and straightening them out so they can dry perfectly straight. And let's set those aside to dry. And I'm doing the same thing with the red, except I'm just making these ribbons a little bit thinner, and I'm going to cut out a bunch of strips and remove those little extra pieces, and then smooth the cuts with my fingers as I put them on the cake box lid and straighten them out with my rulers. And good, let's set these aside to dry as well. Now I have some white marshmallow fondant. We're making the topper here. You can't just roll it out because the back is going to be so ugly. This is going to be on top of the cake, so we have to make it look pretty. So find a smooth area, fold it in on itself. That way the top and the bottom are smooth. Sprinkle down some cornstarch and roll this out, and you'll see it be smooth later. You'll see why I did that, but I rolled it out about a ½ inch thick and I let it set. So now I want to make some darker blue fondant. If you just use royal blue, it's going to be too childish, like Sesame Street blue, and I just want to add some royal blue and then a little bit of black just to deepen that color a little bit. And I'm going to knead this together. And I want to roll it out in a really long strip. That's going to be for the little happy birthday banner. And then I'm going to cut a number 80 out of this one. So I'm just going to roll this into like a square rectangle shape. I have this impression roller. I don't think they still make this, but I can find a similar one and link it below. Sometimes I just like to have a pattern in my numbers, and I'm going to set that aside. Now I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board so it doesn't slide around, an X-Acto knife, and a wet paper towel that I can keep wiping it on, a Dresden tool, a needle tool, and a little bit of water. And I printed this out the size I want it to be. I measured my cake and made sure this was the right size. And I have that fondant that I rolled out with the pattern in it. And I'm doing my trace, cut, and smooth method on here. So I'm just gently tracing this onto the fondant. And you can see I'm not going exactly on the number. I want it to be a little bit bigger than what the number is. I just want it to be a little thicker. So I'm not doing it exactly along the 80. And once I trace the inside and the outside, I'm going to cut them out. Now, I always start by cutting the inner pieces first. It's just so much easier to cut them and smooth them out before you cut the entire number out. If you cut the number out first and then try to cut the inner pieces, it can distort the piece. So I just like to do all the center pieces and then smooth it. And then I'll take my X-Acto knife and carefully cut the entire number out. And anytime I cut anything out of fondant, I'm going to take my time to take my fingers and my tools and smooth my cuts so they don't look jagged. I'm going to realign that on top. I let that sit for about 10 minutes, then I'm flipping the paper over, flip the number over, and I'm getting some water on the back, and I'm making sure that that number is aligned on the 80 just so it's in the right position. I'm taking that fondant I rolled out, flip it over, and then put it down. And then voila, I transferred it onto the fondant and did not distort the number. So now this is a thicker piece of fondant. Anytime I have a thicker piece of fondant, I'm going to make a shallow cut first. So I'm just sticking the tip of the X-Acto blade into the fondant to create a guideline. And then once I have that guideline, I'm going to stick the tip all the way down to the cutting board and use that line as my guide to cut this out. So if I make the guideline first, I'm not going to distort the fondant and it's just going to make it look so much prettier. And then anytime I cut anything out of fondant, again, like I said before, I'm going to flip it over, take my tools, take my fingers, and I'm just rounding the edges and smoothing my cuts so it doesn't look jagged. Once I do the back, I flip it over and do the same thing from the front. And now I need to get skewers in here. You want to twist it in, don't jab it in. So I'm going to screw it in. So I'm sticking it right in the center of that white fondant and I'm screwing it in, flip it over, make sure it's not poking out the front and the back, and I did it under the 8 as well. And let's set that on a cutting board to dry. Let's make the chocolate baseball. I have an 18-inch plastic icing bag, and I'm going to do this entire bag of candy melts in here. And I want to put it in the microwave, so I'm folding down the top, and I'm going to put it in for 30 seconds, flip it over, 30 seconds, flip it over, 30 seconds, until it's completely melted. And I just want to push that chocolate closer to the bottom. Now I have this baseball mold, and it comes in one sheet. So what I had to do is cut the 2 pieces off, and then I cut them, like the plastic, a little closer to the ball, and then I had to cut a little triangular notch in the top of each one. You'll see why I did that, but that way when I put it together, I can insert the tip of the icing bag and fill this up. So you'll want to align those 2 little dots there, and then I have these binder clips, and I just like to clip them just so it's not going to come apart. And then I have a little bowl here that I can set it in there and it's not going to fall over. So I'm going to snip the tip off of that icing bag and squeeze the chocolate in. So now I'm just going to do it about halfway full, and then I'm going to shake it and tap it, and I'm trying to coat the outside just so you can't see any air bubbles forming. So you want to make sure it's completely coated, so that way if you don't fill it up the whole way, it's not going to spill out the top. And once I get most of it coated, I'm going to fill it a little bit more and then do the same thing. Shake it and make sure it's completely coated. And once I do that, I'm going to stick that back in the bowl and then fill the rest of it up just so it's right to the top of that ball. And I'm going to stick a skewer in there and put that in the refrigerator for about 2 hours for it to solidify. Now I want to take my X-Acto knife and I'm cutting straight edges on the bottom of all of these stripes that I made. And now I'm getting my cake out of the refrigerator. The icing is solid and cold, so I'm not going to mess it up. I'm taking a wet paper towel and I am cleaning off the extra icing that was on the cake board. And I have these offset scissors. I will link that in the description. I'm finding the front of the cake, and I started with piping gel, so I'm getting a little bit of piping gel behind each strip and holding it perfectly vertical and sticking that onto the cake. And then I'm going to take those scissors and just snip the top off just so it is perfectly lined with the top of the cake. I'm doing a red one on either side of the white. So this is going to be alternating white and red stripes around the whole cake, and just make sure it's straight. And I'm going to cut the top off. It is even with the top of the cake, and I'm going to do that around the entire cake. So I like to start in the front so the pattern is perfect and centered to the front of the cake, and then I go down one side and then I go to the other side until I reach the back of the cake. So you just want to make sure that these stripes are pressed up against each other the whole way around there, that there's no gaps in between the little stripes. And when you get to the back of the cake, it's inevitable that there's always going to be like a weird piece that's missing. So I needed to cut that red piece a little thinner at the bottom and thicker at the top just so that fits in there. And that's why it's the back of the cake. I'm going to take my fondant smoother and just press that all against the cake, and that looks really good. Let's stick that back in the refrigerator. Now I printed these edible images out. I measured my cake and made sure they were the correct size, and I'm going to cut this around the white border. So I have a video showing you how I use my edible printer, and I will link that in the description for you. Once I have that completely cut out, I'm going to flip it upside down and put it on a paper towel. Now I'm making the name banner, so I'm just cutting that piece off of there. I have this little straight cutter tool. I love this thing. So I'm taking the straight edge and lining it against the bottom, and then I'm using those lines as a guide and just cutting this out. So that way you just get straighter cuts when you use this machine rather than trying to make it with scissors. This way it's like perfect and nice and pretty. So now I have that really thin blue fondant and thin white fondant. I have some piping gel, and these are upside down on a paper towel, and I'm just painting piping gel all along the back, making sure I get the edges so the edges stick to the fondant. When I put it down on the fondant, I'm curling it down so no air bubbles form behind it, and I'm doing the same thing for the Phillies logo as well. And then for the name banner, I'm taking my pizza cutter and just cutting an even border around the entire thing. Once I do that, I'm going to take my fingers and smooth out my cuts and set that on a cutting board. And then with the Phillies logo, I'm just taking my X-Acto knife and cutting exactly along that white border that I cut earlier. And then I am going to take my time and smooth my cuts and making sure none of that fondant looks jagged. And I'm going to dry it on a 6-inch cake dummy because it's going on a 6-inch cake. Let's set those aside. Now I'm making my curlies. You cut a straight line and then a squiggly line down one side, a squiggly line down the other side until you have all these little strips that end into a point. And then I'm wrapping each one around my Dresden tool and setting it on a cutting board, and I'm addicted to these. I make them all the time. I just think they make your cake look a little festive. And let's set those aside to dry. Now I'm washing my hands whenever I handle something like this, and I remove that from the refrigerator. It's been in there for about 2 hours, and I'm removing it from the mold, and you have to get rid of that little seam there, and whoops, there's a little hole that I just created. I will fix that. So I'm taking a palette knife and I'm just scraping off that excess chocolate, and I prefer to use a palette knife rather than a regular knife because it's not as sharp. So now I have to fill in that hole that I created. I melted some more of that white chocolate and I'm just filling in that hole. So I'm just taking that palette knife and filling it in, and then I want to smooth it out as best as I can. And it's not going to look perfect, but I will smooth it out once it solidifies. So I'm going to stick it back into that styrofoam block, and I'm going to put that back in the refrigerator for about an hour for it to solidify. Now I have an icing bag with a tip number 2, and I have about a half cup of powdered sugar, and then I have some meringue powder here, and I'm going to do just like a heaping teaspoon of the meringue powder in there and mix that together. And I'm adding about 2 teaspoons of water and mixing that together. And you don't want it to be too runny. You want it to be able to hold its shape a little bit. And I think I added about 4 or 5 drops of the red. And this is just making some royal icing. So the icing is going to dry really hard. So now I'm going to fold this over on the top and clip it. And then I got that out of the refrigerator, and I can take my palette knife and scrape off any excess chocolate and smooth it out. And now let's get these little stitches on here. Do you see how I have my elbow rested on the countertop and I'm supporting my right hand with my left hand so it doesn't shake? And I am just adjusting the ball as needed and continuing these little V-shaped stitches along the entire baseball. And good, let's set this aside to dry for about 3 to 4 hours so that royal icing can get really hard. Now I want to make the button, so I'm getting some Crisco shortening in there, rip off a little piece and roll it into a ball and flatten it out. That was a little too big, so I'm going to do it again. Roll it into a ball, flatten it out first, and then stick it in there to make the button impression. And I like to peel this back to remove it. That way I don't distort the button. So I'm making 2 buttons, doing the same thing, and setting that aside to dry. Now I got my cake out of the refrigerator, and there's the back with that weird stripe. So making sure I have it at the very front. I'm getting some piping gel, and I dried that little banner with a curve. I stood it up on the side and just bent it in on the edges just so I had a little motion. I'm getting some piping gel behind it where it's going to touch the cake and making sure I have that middle strip in the very front. And then I'm doing the same thing for the Phillies logo. I'm getting some piping gel behind it and sticking that down, making sure there's enough room for the buttons to go above and below it. And now I'm getting some piping gel underneath the 80 where it's going to touch the cake, and I want to stick that down into the cake. And I want to put the ball in as well and make sure I don't have that ugly part facing forward. I want to have it facing down. Get a little bit of piping gel where it's going to stick to the cake and put that down. Now I want to adjust it a little bit, so I have to fill in that little hole that I made with some icing. And now I want to adjust the 80 as well. So I'm filling in those holes that I made, again, with that icing and shifting it just over to the left. This is me being a little extra, but whatever. I'm extra. It's okay. And now I want to put the little curlies on. So I'm getting some piping gel underneath each of the curlies and sticking them down to the cake and onto the cake board. And now I have my big box of curlies that I keep the extra ones just in case of emergency and set that aside. And then I'm pressing the foil against the cake drum so it's flat. I got some glue around the cake drum and on the back of the ribbon, and I'm pressing that down. And here is the cake. Go Phils!
So there you go. How cute is this design? And it is pretty simple-ish, right? So I like to do the stripes to have, a lot of people would make this cake and just do the red stripes and have a space in between because the icing is white. However, I find that if you do it that way, it's not smooth the entire way around, right? Like the red stripes would stick out a little bit and then the icing, it goes back. So it's not, I don't know, it's just the way that I like to do it. That way it just looks more polished, if you will. And like I said, I have a video talking about, well, I have many videos showing you how I use edible images. I will link that in the description. I get all of my edible printing supplies from Icing Images, and I am affiliated with them now. So I'm gonna put my affiliate link down there for you. I have the platinum entry level, wait. Why do I always get confused as to what it's called? There's so many words to it. I have the platinum entry level edible printer system. It's so hard to say, but I believe right now it's around $300, but it comes with the printer and the paper and the cartridges and the ink and the cleaner and everything that you need to get started. You must have a completely separate printer from your regular printer to print edible images. If you can't just stick the edible cartridges in your regular printer and think that it's going to be edible. There is still toxic ink running through that printer, and if somebody eats it, they could get really sick. So you do not want to do that. You want to make sure that you invest in a completely new, never used printer. And with that chocolate baseball mold, it was a little hard for me. You should have seen me doing the voiceover for that. I was getting so annoyed because I kept messing up. But it does come in one sheet, and you just have to cut it. That way it forms together so you can clip it together, because there's a lot of excess plastic in there, and I just cut the extra plastic away and cut the little notch in the middle just to make it a lot easier to work with. Now this cake on the inside is a 3-layer non-torted 6-inch cake. And I have a video where I talk about when I tort and when I don't tort cakes, and I will link that in the description. However, I wanted this to be 3 layers so it could be a little bit taller. This was probably about 6.5 to 7 inches tall. And that way I could fit the happy birthday banner on the bottom and have the name, the logo in the middle, and still have enough room for the buttons. If I only did a 2-layer cake, a 2-layer torted cake, it would have been 2 inches less tall, and I just wouldn't have had enough room. So you have to think in advance sometimes before you even bake the cake about how tall you need it to be and how much decorating room you need. And it feeds about like 16 to 20 people. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I now have a KakeAcademy membership program. There are 3 tiers to the membership. The base tier is a cake pop tier where you can help support me monthly and help me make more content for you. And you also get free and discounted extras. Extras are things like PDFs and recipe books that I release. And then the top 2 tiers, the cupcake tier and the dessert table tier, both have access to my exclusive Facebook group, and I go live in that group. I did a marshmallow fondant live. I did a live on icing smooth buttercream cakes, and coming in the first week in October, I am doing a 2-dimensional fondant live. So we are having so much fun in that group, and we are bouncing ideas off of each other and getting pricing advice, and I would love to have you aboard. So I will list that information for you in the description. Please like this video if you liked it, and if you are enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is in the description. And I would love it if you keep in touch on socials, and you can check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next, and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake, have fun, and go Phils. I will see you on the next one. Bye.